85% of nights go completely unmeasured. Most people do not track their sleep consistently, and yet sleep drives outcomes in heart disease, diabetes, dementia, mental health, and cognitive performance. Here's the deeper problem. There's roughly one sleep specialist for every 40,000 patients in the US who need help. Even if people wanted expert guidance, the system simply doesn't scale. So the real question isn't whether AI can improve sleep, it's whether you have the data infrastructure, clinical rigor, and guardrails required to make AI actually work in healthcare in practice, where deterministic outcomes and regulatory scrutiny aren't optional. So, how do you turn nearly 1 billion hours of real-world sleep data into a defensible AI moat that regulators reimburse and enterprises trust? I'm Tom Chavez, and today I'm joined by Colin Lawlor, founder and CEO of Sleep.ai. Colin has spent over 15 years in sleep science. He helped pioneer the world's first contactless, sonar-based sleep tracking app, built normalization models across 600 plus wearables, and led the launch of the first government reimbursed digital sleep intervention in Germany. Today, we're going to get into one of my favorite topics, which is sleep. We're going to unpack what it actually takes to build AI-powered healthcare infrastructure and why plugging sleep data into an LLM just doesn't cut it. Colin, welcome. It's great to have you.
Tom, it's great to be here. Thanks for the time. It's going to be great fun.
It absolutely is. And as I already mentioned, sleep is one of my most important topics. Colin, you should see the people that I drive a little bit crazy. I work with, and I try to get to know them a little bit, and then I ask hyper personal questions a little too quickly, like, "How was your sleep last night? How are you sleeping?" So, and the reason I do that is because I really believe that sleep is the precondition for great company building and successful founders. So, love to get your angle into this. Why do high performers, particularly in the tech arena, still misunderstand sleep, its importance, and how it can help give them a competitive edge?
Well, look, Tom, that's a great question. We're surrounded by Type A personalities, right? We're entrepreneurs. We're trying to solve big problems. We're trying to change the world, and so forth. And with that very singular mission-driven focus, sometimes we forget that the machine that makes all of that possible, ourselves, also needs some care and attention, right?
Mm.
And sleep is often the first thing to suffer because when I was a kid, for example, people used to think that sleep was for wimps. You can sleep when you're dead. You heard phrases like that back
Yeah,
then.
yeah.
Uh, the truth is, people are sitting on their machines. They want to stay and work at it longer, but without a little discipline to actually invest in your own machine, your body and your mind, so that you can actually perform. And sleep is at the heart of that. Without taking some attention and care around that, you're actually not going to do the job as well as you should.
Yeah, listen, I remember when I came of age in business, exactly to your point, Colin, people, I think businessmen especially would like to brag and carry on about, oh, I only need 3 to 4 hours of sleep, but I'm cranking all the time. I'm doing, I'm a machine, right?
Yeah.
And and I thought I needed to emulate that. So I remember my first company when I'm a pup, I'm working, you know, 7 to 11 p.m. Literally, would go
Yeah.
home at 11, take a quick shower and collapse, and then get up the next morning at 5:36 and do it again.
Yeah.
Half days on weekends. And then I realized, like, this is a false economy. I'm not clear headed at all, right? I'm making
That's
terrible
right.
decisions. I think I'm cranking, but I'm really just I'm thrashing. I'm not cranking.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And look, I can tell you myself, I had a similar experience when I was much younger. My first job, I'd come off a transatlantic flight. I was in Dublin, Ireland, working really, really long hours a day or so after that trip. And I remember almost crashing on the highway on my way home. And, that might have killed me
Yeah.
and that might have killed the person beside me. And so you think about it now, why is that the case? Well, we've seen that sleep deprivation acts almost like drinking alcohol.
Hmm.
If you are actually significantly sleep deprived, it has a very similar effect to drinking two or three or more drinks.
Yep.
So your cognitive function is immediately impaired. What that means now, if you think about like you said, the false economy, as we go through the day, having woken up in the morning, usually with more vigor, more creativity, and so forth. As we go through the day, our batteries get depleted.
Yeah,
And when we get to the evening time, obviously we're least effective and our body's expecting to be sleeping, but we're still cranking out the work. The reality is that we're cranking out the work at a far less efficient pace by that time of the day. And in fact, in many cases, we may be trying to solve problems that are impossible to solve without a little sleep.
that's right.
So, you're absolutely right. It's a false economy. Um, but it's not only to do with the work, it's to do with your relationships, it's to do with how you look, it's to do with the creativity in your team, it's to do with the example that you set
Right.
for the team to follow. All of those things have huge effects on your company and your organization and your chances of success. So, for sure, you need to make sure you have enough sleep yourself in order to perform. There's no doubt about that.
Here, here. Colin, you've amassed nearly 1 billion hours of real world sleep data. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about first, how'd you do that? And
Yeah.
relatedly, what does data at that scale reveal that clinical studies just simply can't?
Great questions, Tom. So, look, first of all, we started with a device, the world's most precise device using radio frequency technology, which we could sit beside your bed and collect data longitudinally without you needing to do anything. But we put that device into hospital sleep labs around the world and we collect thousands and thousands of nights of data, comparing that versus the gold standard. Because the reality is that measuring sleep is complex. And to do it in a hospital sleep lab, you might have 15, 16, or even 20 sensors attached to your body.
Hmm.
And then, of course, you're expected to sleep, right? But that is the gold standard.
Yeah.
So if you want to develop your technology, you better do it versus the gold standard, but not in a small group of 20 or 30 people. You need hundreds and thousands of people, and you need people with specific idiosyncrasies, people with high BMO, low BMI, people with sleep disorders, people without sleep disorders, people with chronic diseases, and so forth. You need a big data set of very high quality sleep lab data. So we started with a hardware device to do all of that.
Hmm.
Then we developed a new technology which commandeers the speaker and the microphone in a smartphone and turns that into a biomotion sensor. So it has no need to purchase a hardware device at all. We can collect breathing and other data from the phone, not by listening, but by using sound waves and measuring the response times.
Hmm.
So that enabled us to move from the device to an app. And using the app, we could scale up much more significantly. So we went initially direct to consumer so that we could collect a large amount of data. So we picked up 150 or so million hours of data in using our own very robust technologies. But once we did that, then we opened up our platform to data from all of the wearables. And as you know, there are we're now collecting data from upwards of 600 different wearables.
Hmm.
And then once we did that, we could then build other and newer models. So essentially, we did it in a series of steps, starting with hardware, moving to software only on the phone, expanding to wearables, and now we collect lots of other data, which in turn helps us to understand how people are sleeping.
Fascinating. Fascinating. And it's obviously working. Now, I've read some of your work, Colin, and you've said repeatedly that plugging sleep data into an LLM isn't enough. By the way, we're living
Yeah,
in an age where everybody, and it's driving me a little bit crazy. I was just recently commenting on this online. Like, okay, if I had a quarter now for everybody who's saying, "Well, I'm pretty sure the LLMs are going to do that," or just give the data to the LLMs and they'll handle it for
yeah,
you. So
yeah,
here we are again.
yes,
why,
yes, indeed.
why is that premise wrong here?
Okay, well, look, there's no doubt the LLMs are very powerful and they do lots of things very well. But the bottom line is that in health to begin with, if you don't understand the source of the data and the provenance of the data and the differences in the data, well, then the problem you have is you don't really have the data understanding you need to manage any given problem. And let me illustrate that. So, if you or I were to wear 3 or 4 different wearables tonight, right? And let's say we were one of the 15% of people that uses a wearable many nights to track. 85% of people don't, even though they may own the wearable. They like to charge it at nighttime or they don't like to wear anything at all at nighttime. So let's say we're one of that 15%. If we put 3 or 4 different wearables on our bodies tonight, we are going to get 3 or 4 different answers about our sleep.
Hmm.
So, which of those answers do you want to put into the LLM? Let's start right there. So, if I put in data from one device versus another device, I'm starting with totally different data, even though it's still Tom that was measuring his sleep. So, the key to begin with is the LLMs don't understand, or they're unable to differentiate between the data that they are fed and its provenance and its accuracy and reliability and what biases are built into that data before they receive it. So naturally, at any system, whether it's an LLM or a human being, garbage in, garbage out. So if you don't feed it the data in a way that can be used, then it won't be able to use it well, right? It stands to reason. So starting from there, that to me is the first piece. It's the foundation, right? If you want to build a house, you need a stable foundation. And if the data is not right, well, then what is the LLM supposed to do? Uh, but from there, it's not only about the data and how you're sleeping or what problem you have. Once we understand that, the next question is, well, what's actually going to affect that?
Mm.
And here, the interesting thing is that there are many, many things that can affect it. That's the nature of sleep. It's multifactorial, right? So if you have been pulling a number of all-nighters, that's going to have an effect on your sleep. If you are stressed, it'll have an effect on your sleep. If your bedroom's too hot, if you've got an undiagnosed sleep disorder, etc., etc. And right now, you have to have the data about those things. You have to understand the patterns in those things before you can truly, make assumptions or arrive at conclusions from any given data set. So the problem for the LLM is that it doesn't know what data it's dealing with and how to use it. And on the other side, it doesn't know what solutions or interventions are proven to be effective for that specific issue.
Mm.
And when it comes to health, it shouldn't take guesses, but as we all know, from time to time it does. In an effort to please
Yeah.
you or me, it wants to sound confident and authoritative. If I can, I'll just tell you a very funny story today. I saw a doctor post on LinkedIn. He ran a study and he asked an LLM to review 26 radiology images for him and to arrive at some conclusions. So he set those instructions into the LLM. He put some graphs and charts in there too, and the LLM delivered the conclusions, but he actually never put the pictures in.
Yeah. Well, this is the famous sycophancy bias, right? It's always going to try to do something to dazzle you and impress you, even if it's just making shit up. Yeah.
Right. Now, it's going to get better, it's going to improve, but it requires humans, it requires guardrails, and because it's health, it requires discipline around those guardrails, which really you cannot short circuit.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're dealing with people's lives.
That's right. Well, speaking of dealing with people's lives, and this is something that is just confusing and fascinating to me at the same time, right? I think we're coming now, modern medical science is coming to an understanding of how sleep drives and shapes heart disease, diabetes, dementia, mental health. I think 20 to
Right.
30 years from now, we're going to really understand this in a precise, quantifiable way. So
Yeah.
it confuses me because, my God, we've, to your point, we've got oncology on lock. We've got so many other medical aspects of modern science
Yeah.
with many more decimal points than we can count, and yet we don't really understand the impact. And again, in a quantifiable way, we understand it notionally, but now we're starting to really measure it. Why is it lagged, right? Why is sleep so behind nutrition, exercise, and just other medical fields? Why are we so slow here?
Well, look, I think part of it may go all the way back to the beginning of sleep medicine. It's a relatively new discipline itself, right? And it was, the work of Bill Dement, a famous professor at Stanford, who set up the world's first sleep clinic and went around the hospital and asked all of the experts, pulmonology and cardiology and neurology and so forth, how am I going to measure this thing called sleep?
Hmm.
And they pulled together what is now polysomnography, a hospital-based sleep lab. That's the gold standard still used.
Hmm.
Um, The bottom line is that that's a new discipline because Bill, who was an amazing leader in the field, only passed a couple of years ago, right? So, and I have personally had the privilege of meeting him a couple of times. And so, the father of sleep medicine is just really recently departed. So the field is new.
Hmm.
The other issue is that, unlike nutrition and fitness, you just think about it. If you stand in the mirror, you can tell if you're putting on a few pounds, right? You've got some self awareness of that. You don't have to have the weighing scales to tell you. You can probably see it, or your significant other will see it, and they'll tell you about it.
Hmm.
If you exercise, you know that you exercise. You know that you didn't exercise, right? You don't need help with that. But when it comes to your sleep, you go to bed and you don't know what's happened. You are not conscious for the process. So because you're not conscious for the process, it's harder for you or me to understand, how do I sleep myself?
Hmm.
I don't have any personal reference. I don't have a mirror I can look at. I don't have, my recollection of the running and exercise. So, for all of those reasons, it was new, and then it was hard to measure, right, and hard to understand.
Hmm.
But finally, along that pathway, medicine has developed into all the specialties: neurology, cardiology, etc., etc. And in medicine today, the average doctor in the United States is graduating with approximately 3 hours of sleep education,
Yeah, they're the worst
right?
offenders.
Right. And they're often the worst offenders, particularly in their training. It's like
Yeah,
a badge of honor.
yeah,
I got through med school, so therefore
yeah.
I'm a hero. And look, there's a lot of people very motivated to do the right thing, but they do not invest enough in sleep in the curriculum. So
Hmm.
when you do all of that, then of course it's no wonder that it's not showing up in
Yeah,
the general,
right.
practitioner's review of your health, because they're not trained to do this.
That's
They
right.
don't know this. Now,
But
Tom, the way I think about this is, okay, we can approach this one of two ways. We can campaign and we can push and shove to change medical education, and maybe we'll get something done in 10 or 15 years' time.
hmm,
And to me, we can't wait,
yeah,
right? We can't wait for that. We've got data. A person with data has to be responsible to do something with it, right? So
hmm,
we can't wait. So changing medical education is not enough. It will take too long.
yeah,
Beauty is, we now have the consumer caring about their sleep. That's huge change.
yeah.
And we have more and more technology that we can use to help them to understand their own sleep. And now what is happening is those people are showing up at the doctor with really informed
That's
questions.
right.
And that's where technology comes in, because we can turbocharge and tidy up and make a big difference in this whole space.
Right. No, I think that's a really apt point, Colin. So much of the way this is treated is culturally determined. And if you're talking to your doctor who came up, as you say, with a badge of courage that said, "Hey, I only slept 2.5 hours and I'm fine," well,
Yeah,
that goes some distance towards explaining this mess we're in.
right.
Right. It would explain why doctors don't attend to these issues as vigorously as they should. I guess when you say that you look in the mirror and you can tell if you're fat, or your significant other will let you know, hey, you're getting too much weight. Sure, I agree, but I can't be the only one who, after a night of bad sleep, wakes up and says, "Oh my God, I feel like hammered shit. Like I'm in control of my. I know how I feel, right?"
Yeah, yeah.
So
Look, you're dead right, but the problem with it is it doesn't happen like that. You don't go from perfectly normal, healthy sleep when you're young and virile and all of that, and then all of a sudden one day you're not.
mm,
It's actually
yeah,
usually a slow, steady decline, and in marketing they call it, just noticeable difference (JND). So the change is slow and gradual. So actually, people wake up 10 years later and they go, "Geez, what just happened? I'm sleeping like shit."
yeah,
But it didn't just happen. It's been building over many years, and so that's one issue. I just want to say one thing in defense of the doctors, because doctors are amazing people. We have to remember that in the system these days, they're being, there's a no disrespect to MBAs, but there's an MBA outside the office going, "Hey, you've got 8.6 minutes with this patient, and you've now spent zero point 0.2 minutes over. Move."
Yeah,
So it's not only that they don't want to, it's also that they have so little time.
that's right.
And that we're going to have less of that time, of course, as time as the years progress. So we got all of those things feeding into this, and yet we are discovering, finally able to prove. We always believed it, but we couldn't prove it. But we now know that poor sleep causes chronic disease. We know that, for example, a person at my age, for every 1 minute of deep sleep that I lose, that increases my risk of dementia by 27%. We know that now,
Oh,
right?
wow.
We did not know that before. We guessed it might be the case. Stroke, cardiovascular disease, blood sugar control, mental health, depression within that, and so forth. It is driving chronic disease all over the place. And so we believe that therefore it's the single most underaddressed opportunity. As you rightly said, we can make small differences in oncology for sure. Let's keep doing those things. And look at the breakthroughs have been amazing. But, I lost my own mother to cancer very recently, and I was stressed about logistics. But I've just read a paper in the Lancet a year ago, which told me I was stressed about the wrong thing. If they had known her circadian rhythm, they could deliver therapy which has as between 30 and 40% greater effect just by knowing what her normal sleep patterns are.
Hmm.
So the outcomes from therapeutic interventions across these diseases are greatly affected by how the patient sleeps as well. So to avoid disease, we need to invest in sleep. And in order to treat it successfully, we need to invest in sleep. It has an effect across the board. But now we have the data, and the data is becoming more and more and more compelling as the days, weeks, months, and years go by. And so it's like back to the earlier point, we have got to do something about this now. We cannot wait.
Well, speaking of data,
Yeah.
one of our core theses over here at Superset is that proprietary data drives durable advantage. And the more proprietary data you have that cannot be ingested or scraped by any known source on the internet or by any LLM, the better your odds. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit for Sleep.ai, Sleep.ai,
Mhm.
your company. How
Yeah.
has your data set become a defensible moat?
Thank you. And look, by the way, we subscribe to that concept incredibly well. So,
Hmm.
the data and what we do with it is going to be required by the LLMs if they're to have any effect in the future, right? So you are absolutely spot on from my point of view. At our level, you can imagine there are really three different types of data. The first data is how people sleep in the real world. And we collect that data not just from any wearable, because any wearable company collects its own data, but we're Switzerland. We don't really care which device the data comes from or if the data just comes from the phone. The point is that because we're Switzerland, we're able to convert it into Swiss francs, right? Because we've got a proprietary model, which is based on our proprietary technology and hundreds of millions of hours of our proprietary data. Nobody in the world has that data. And if they want to copy it, they'll just have to go build a technology and go through the 5 to 7 years we've just gone through collecting the data. Now, of course, if you had limitless resources and money, maybe you could do it in 3 to 4 years, but that's the first part. The data about how people sleep and the relative performance of each of the wearables versus a gold standard so that we can normalize it and convert it into Swiss francs. That's the first part. How do people sleep? On the other side, what we have also been doing is we've been running R&D programs for some of the world's best companies in everything from supplements to interventions to improve sleep to products that have effect on sleep. And we have now completed 250 separate scientific studies. What do I mean there? Well, in every single case, we have a group of people whose sleep is monitored for many weeks. And then we have a specific intervention which is made. We change the product, we give them a supplement, we measure a cognitive behavioral therapy program,
Hmm.
250 interventions. And in every case, we then measure for many weeks later what effect, if any, that intervention had.
Hmm.
So we understand exactly what's affecting whom, what's affecting nobody, which people get benefits from what kinds of interventions, and which get benefits from none. Um, That is impossible to replicate unless you want to run 250 studies. So even if you have endless access to capital, that's going to take, well, 5 years, $50 million these days, and you're going to be in a bit of a hurry to do it, right? So that is a huge part of our moat. But those two independently are valuable. What's most valuable is when you connect the two, because what we also get to do is we get to continuously measure the effect of any known intervention, from behavior change to environment change to product, uh, on both sides of the system. And this is the layer that we think is going to be most valuable to health and wellness apps. In other words, how can you tell whether your meditation program, fitness program, weight loss program, disease management program is having any effect on the outcomes? The first place you're going to see it is in the sleep data,
Yeah.
if you have access to the data.
Yeah.
And so we, by closing the loop on every intervention, every message, everything we do, we get that third advantage, the relationship between those two data sets. And that's been our focus. And it's now at the point where it's very difficult to replicate either of those. And it'll just take time and money. But we're not only doing this to build a moat, we're building this moat to have impact. And we're making this moat available to health and wellness apps who are trying to improve health, but they cannot improve health by ignoring sleep. But doing sleep by themselves is very hard. They'd have to relearn what we've just spent many, many years trying to learn. Why do that? We want to be Sleep AI inside those health and wellness apps, the Sleep AI intelligence layer, essentially, that helps them to deliver better outcomes.
That's really compelling. Really compelling. Well, Colin, let's now move to our lightning round. I'm going to ask you a few quick hitting questions, and your task is just to react. Don't overthink it. Just
Okay.
emote in the moment. Yeah?
Okay, I'll give it a shot.
Let's go. All right. First one. What's the biggest mistake healthcare AI founders make when pitching investors?
I think they focus on the AI, and not on the outcomes. I think the ultimate thing here is, like, it's the outcome that matters for a patient, a consumer, a customer, and the business. It's not the AI. The AI is becoming commoditized, actually.
100%. I certainly agree. What's one myth about sleep optimization that refuses to die?
Oh my God. There are people at the moment, you've got me going here, Tom, you're getting
Mm,
me going. There are people that right now are trying to hack sleep so that people can get 5 hours of, 8 hours worth of sleep in 5 hours. That drives me
mm.
nuts. It's yes, I get it. It would be wonderful if we could all do with less sleep, but actually, there's no evidence whatsoever that anybody can, except for a tiny number of people with a short sleep gene. We can talk about that later. The rest of us mere mortals, no, 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 that's not safe, and that keeps coming up.
I told you at the beginning, I do ask people how much sleep they got the night before. And I actually, in open meetings, really try to celebrate the people who got a lot of sleep. I think,
Smart.
and the people who brag about, oh, I only needed 4.5, those are the ones who worry me the most.
Yes.
Um, okay, if you could mandate one sleep behavior for every founder, what would it be?
Try to get some consistency. That's probably the most important, right? Generally, sleep is a highly individualist thing. Some things affect me better or differently than you, but one that's constant for everybody is consistency. Try your very best to just get some regular hours. If you're a night owl and you like to work at night, well, then go to bed later by all means, but also get up later. And if you're like me and you're a morning bird, well, then don't do that. Go to bed early and get up early. But try to keep it consistent as much as you can. Look, I know it's impossible to do it every single night,
Mm.
but try to do it as much as you can. That's the easiest, simplest thing for us to do. It will also deal with the first problem we talked about earlier, which is put some boundaries around your sleep and protect it. And having a time to do that is probably the simplest way to do it.
Hmm. Final question. Is sleep the most undervalued performance lever in modern business?
There is absolutely no doubt whatsoever.
Mm.
So, we could now quote a whole bunch of studies around cognitive performance, problem solving ability, people working together in groups, relationships. There is no doubt whatsoever that sleep is driving your performance. The issue is, for most people, they don't know how. They're in the dark about it, right?
Okay.
So that's the key. And last, just a statistic on that, the American Academy of Sleep Medicine commissioned RAND to do a study on the cost of poor sleep to the American economy.
Mm,
That's 10 years ago, right? And 10 years ago, the cost at that time was $411 billion per year.
wow. I absolutely subscribe. I didn't know the number. I'm sure it's 411 billion and growing. And just as you say, if you have a sleep problem, or you think it's not affecting you, you're wrong. You're just not aware of it, right?
Yeah,
So
that's right.
so building that awareness is everything.
That's exactly right.
Colin, so great to have you. Thank you for joining.
Hey, thanks, Tom. I really enjoyed it. Really did.
That wraps up this episode of the Closed Session Podcast. I really want to thank Colin Lawlor, founder and CEO at Sleep.ai, for joining on one of my favorite topics. If you'd like to contact Colin, you can find his LinkedIn profile in the show notes or at closedsessionpod.com. You can also visit his website at sleep.ai. If you haven't subscribed yet and want a regular stream of ideas and insights in your podcast feed, hit that subscribe button now, or follow us on YouTube or any other place you like to get your podcasts. That's all for today. Until next time, keep building, keep cranking.